Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, Executive Editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with a preview of our ClassicsToday.com Insider Subscriber 10 Best Recordings of Fill in the Blank. And the blank is going to be filled in this week by Zubin Mehta, who, believe it or not, is 86 years old. I can't get over that. My goodness, I remember when I was just starting out in the 60s, and he was a kid and I was a littler kid, and boy oh boy, the time does fly. Zubin Mehta's career, I think, is really fascinating. Very, very interesting to look at, because there is a way in which he's going to be and has been treated differently from other conductors of his caliber. Now, let us be clear. I've talked about this a little bit before. The fact that he's of Indian descent has to some degree counted against him in the highly politicized, nationalized, prejudiced, bigotized, biased world of classical music. In terms of his perception, I don't think it's hindered his career. He's had a marvelous career by any standard. I mean, he's conducted all the world's best orchestras. He's had many, many major posts. He's been extremely loyal to his ensembles, to his orchestras, to the Israel Philharmonic. He would have been more loyal to the New York Philharmonic if they'd let him be. And so I'm not saying that, he has anything to look back on and say, oh my, I was shafted because I was Indian. But there is one very interesting sense in which I think he is going to be treated unequally. I don't know if it's going to be unfairly, but unequally. And that's this. Conductors of his age at this stage in his career, many of them, not all of them, but many of them have a tendency to, what shall we say, revert to form. Think about it for a minute. Think of all the cranky old German conductors who in their late phase do nothing but conduct cranky old German music. There was Günter Wand and there was Karl Böhm. Well, actually, he kind of got into Tchaikovsky later on, but, he had always done cranky old German music. But, as they get older, they tend to go back and do the basic repertoire that they were trained in. They limit what they do. And some of them actually do go home again. I say to Zubin Mehta, can't go home again because he's not going to go back to India. But, think of all of the English conductors who wind up back in England. Colin Davis, Andrew Davis. I mean, if your name is Davis, you have to go back to England. Even Simon Rattle, who is more or less the late middle of his career, unfortunately, for some of us. He went back to England after his Berlin phase. Or think of the French people. I mean, Paul Paret went back to France. Charles Munch went back to France after his Boston period. Jean Martinon went back to France after his Chicago period. Interestingly, the French ones tend to drop dead as soon as they go back to France. Actually, Paret didn't, but the others kind of did. It's a fascinating phenomenon. And so, that's just geographical. But now let's put aside the geographics. Think of the repertoire. Think of what these people actually play. If they go back to England, they're always going to do, like Elgar and that stuff endlessly. Andrew Davis has been doing British music for his whole career, and there's no sign of that stopping. And then there's the French people. I mean, Jean Martinon, was a wonderful conductor in Chicago. I mean, he didn't get along well, and it wasn't exactly the most successful tenure, but, he was a fabulous conductor. He did all kinds of interesting repertoire. He did Nielsen, he did Mahler, he did, Ferrez. Then he goes back to France, and he made that fabulous series of, all of 20th century French music for Erato. Charles Munch, of course, was the Berlioz guy at Honegger, and he had his crowd of French things that he did, and he went back and conducted the Orchestre de Paris. It's really, really interesting because each of these people has their proprietary repertoire, which has nothing whatsoever to do, frankly, with what they might be best at. It really doesn't. It has nothing to do with their ability. Pierre Monteux is the wonderful case in point. His favorite composer to conduct was Brahms, and he left only one commercial recording of a Brahms symphony in all of his, 10,000 years of work, because no one wanted to hear him do Brahms. They wanted to hear him do French stuff. And that wasn't where his first love was. Very, very interesting. And there's the Russians, of course, who do Russian stuff. We live in a culture. This is all just marketing. It's all marketing. I've talked about the pianist Vladimir Feltzman before, who's Russian, and he came here to do all this Russian stuff that every other Russian pianist in the world did, and most of them did it better. And what he really wanted to play was Bach. And when he finally got a chance to do Bach, he was really good at Bach, but no one wanted to hear that just because he was Russian. So what is the situation going to be with Zubin Mehta? Mehta has no musical home except Vienna. That's where he was trained. That was his original, starting point. And quite frankly, that's where he has expressed himself, I think, most effectively, or quite often most effectively, in music of the late Romantic Viennese period. I mean, think of that great Bruckner Ninth and the Schmidt Fourth. And there's all these, the performances and the recordings he made with the Vienna Philharmonic. He doesn't have a home. He really doesn't. Can you think of a segment of the repertoire that he does proprietarily? Not better than anybody, just proprietarily. I mean, think of all those Finnish conductors now who are running around doing Sibelius. I mean, what's his name? Klaus Makala, whatever his name was, who just did that horrible Sibelius cycle as his first major international release as the, hot young conductor of everything, which is what he's supposed to be. Of every orchestra or every ensemble, they all want him. God knows why. Let him learn how to conduct first. But no, that's what I said. They're going to take him anyway, and he did the Sibelius cycle, and it was absolutely dreadful, but he did it because he was Finnish. Not because he had anything particularly interesting to say about Sibelius. And even Pavel Berglund wound up back in Helsinki doing Sibelius because he was Finnish. That is how the marketing works. Now, in real life, of course, these conductors have positions with orchestras and they play hosts of music. I'm only talking about what we see, the visible surface, as evidenced by what major labels are willing to record. And that is, a whole other world from what these conductors actually do when they have regular seasons with regular orchestras and they have to play a whole slew of music. Zubin Mehta does really good late Romantic music of that school. That is the Brahms, Bruckner, Mahler, and the Second Viennese school. He does very well too, and he's a splendid opera conductor. He really is. He does all this stuff really, really well. But he doesn't get the credit for it because he doesn't come from that background. And that I find a fascinating thing. You can't pigeonhole him. You can't market him as a cranky old German something, who's going back to Beethoven after 10,000 years playing yucky American music or yucky other music in whatever far-off land he had a regular position in. We don't get to do that with him. Because if he goes back and starts doing the Viennese stuff, everyone's going to say, well, it's okay, but so-and-so did it better, and so-and-so did that better, and so-and-so is really German, or so-and-so is really French, or so. He doesn't get the benefit of the doubt when it comes to that. And I think that's kind of a shame, because really, this has nothing to do with what the performances of the music actually sound like. And it only goes to show what I've always, said a million times, which is that we make judgments. I mean, the PR, apparatus, and sometimes actual listeners and critics and people, they make judgments not based on listening. They make judgments based on purely non-musical, criteria. And those non-musical criteria are so unbelievably silly and irrelevant when you say what they are. Like, who cares where he was born? Who cares where he came from? He's as well trained, he's as musical, he's as solid a conductor in the repertoire he does well as anybody has ever been. He really is. I mean, we went through his Decca set, we went through his Warner recordings. There's wonderful, wonderful stuff in there. I mean, he did fabulous The Planets, fabulous Rite of Spring, great Saint-Saëns Organ Symphony, a terrific Nielsen 4. He does a whole lot of things really, really well. But he's not going to get the credit for claiming any specific repertoire as his own, even if he feels it, even if he really feels that these are the pieces that best represent me. And I think that's really not fair. I mean, these other guys get it, and they get it, the credit, whether or not they do that music well or not. It's their music. And for convenience, PR organizations plug them on that basis, and people write about them on that basis. And I remember when, when Günter Wand was doing it, it's like, well, I played all this contemporary stuff. Now I'm doing the German classics. And everybody looked at him as, the second coming of a Germanitude when it came to, that repertoire, to the Beethoven, Bruckner, Brahms, Mozart, and whatnot, And so was that reasonable? No, it wasn't. Was he very good at it? Yes, he was. I mean, he really was. That was fine. But still, he had no proprietary claim to that music. No one has proprietary claim to any music unless they wrote it themselves, like Bernstein conducting his own music. Nobody does. And it's really, really an indication. I don't know what to call it. Would you call it stereotyping? Would you call it prejudice? I'm not entirely sure, because that's not anyone's intention. It's marketing is what it is. It's just lazy, simplistic marketing, which is what's going on. One way to differentiate your guy from another guy is that your guy or girl plays music of a certain place because they're from that place. And I the older I get, the more that sort of repels me. And it repels me in the case of somebody like Zubin Mehta, who deserves to be judged purely on the basis of his musical accomplishments, which are quite substantial. And so to find out what some of those are, I urge you to subscribe to classicstoday.com, to become an insider subscriber, and to head on over there and have a look at Zubin Mehta's 10 best recordings. I hesitate to do a 10 best recordings for conductors who are still with us because, of course, they could always do more. But that just means I get to do another video about them, and I really wish him well and hope that's what he does, that he continues to do more and do some different stuff, do some stuff he hasn't recorded before. Let's hear his Mahler Ninth, and some of the Mahlers that he hasn't had a chance to do. Let's hear some of his other explorations of that whole Viennese school that he hasn't had a chance to do. Maybe some more Bruckner, who knows? I really would be curious to see what he's got in him at the age of 86. Everyone's running around after Herbert Blomstedt, who's in his 90s. Why do we have to wait that long to get Zubin Mehta? Do some fresh repertoire. I know he knows it and he's got it. And let's see what's out there. I would be curious to know. Certainly he deserves as much of that grand old man, falderall that we give all the other grand old men, right? He's still conducting, Mehta. He's still got a career going. He's in great shape. So we'll see what happens. Keep on listening, friends. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for becoming a ClassicsToday.com subscriber, if you have not yet. And I will see you over there. Bye-bye.